Brian, I would like to maybe ask 3 or 4 questions regarding the science behind AQ and just really understanding exactly what is AQ, answer intelligence, and its impact on business leadership. So, with that, can you briefly explain the concept of answer intelligence or AQ and its origins a little bit more?
Yeah, let me explain the concept of it and then the origins. So basically, we're all familiar with questions, 6 WH questions: why, what, how, when, where, and those are great. Answer intelligence is mapping those questions to specific answers and understanding which questions relate to which answers. So to illustrate, if we're talking about leadership and you're interviewing me for a position, you might ask, me, Brian, what do you think leadership is? And it's a concept I could say it's inspiring others and holding them accountable to achieve goals. That's a definition. It's a concept. As a metaphor, I could say leadership is like 2 ropes, and I can have my fingers extended, and I could say, these two fingers extended. When you inspire others and hold them accountable by themselves, that's great. But it's even stronger when you do it in combination. I can cross my fingers and say that's a stronger rope. So sort of illustrated there that what questions are answered with concept and metaphor. And there's a similar mapping where why questions are mapped to story and theory, which is also strategy, and how questions are mapped to procedure and action. So what AQ is a way to intentionally navigate any conversation for the purpose of greater influence in the world. So that's what the framework is. And let me pause there, and then I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about the science if you'd like.
That would be great.
Okay, so the science basically relates to the structure of knowledge. It's related to epistemology of knowledge. It's a strong grounding there, but it's also tethered to other disciplines like psychology, neuroscience, among others. And the basic idea is that there are different types of knowledge that we might call declarative knowledge, like knowledge of concepts, practical knowledge, how we get things done, abstract knowledge, things like theories. And all this knowledge can be communicated through questions and answers. And that's basically where this framework was developed, as a way to transfer knowledge. And I'll just say one more thing. Like, my original aspiration doing this research would be, imagine if you could take that story that you know so well and you could just transfer it to someone else. And we don't have like a plug that I can take from my brain to your brain. But that was sort of the underlying logic here, is how can we best transfer important knowledge to each other so we can understand and influence others?
Well, that was an awesome explanation. Appreciate it, Brian. So just to dig a little deeper on that, so why are the 6 WH questions so essential in business communication and decision making? You just referenced some of that a little bit, but can you dig a little deeper?
Yeah, sure. Let me give you an example. Maybe it could relate to your audience. You think of like change, and maybe 2 organizations are merging. There's a lot of change that's occurring, a lot of important questions. And let's just take culture. Both organizations approach culture, but the key is we have alignment around what those answers are. So take the basic questions. What is culture here at company X, and company Y? Why is culture important at company X, company Y? How do we live the culture, company X, company Y? And each of these questions relates back to those answer types I talked about. And on a very fundamental level, if your stories in company X are not the same or aligned with the stories for company Y, there's going to be a disconnect. So, each of the answer types gives us a way to get alignment around culture or any topic. So that would be sort of an explanation of, the questions, why they're important. I think we all realize that, but then mapping it to the answers and having these conversations where we're aligned and we both think about culture the same way.
So, Brian, you just mentioned alignment around culture, but how does the AI framework fit into the broader spectrum of leadership and effective communication exactly?
Yeah, I think, when you're a leader, you're going to be asked pointed questions. So let me paint a picture. Let's say that I'm a leader and I'm working with a direct report, and this direct report was just passed over for a promotion, right? They're going to be asking all kind of questions of me. They're going to say, why do I feel so bad about this? How do I, improve certain skills? What did I do wrong? These are all questions that you need to connect to different answers in order to be credible with the person you're talking. So, for instance, as a concept, I might realize the person that's talking to me has lower motivation. And since I understand answers and I understand the way the world works to some extent, I could say, why is motivation lower if someone is passed over promotion? And you start to connect the dots and say recognition is important. So I'm meeting them where they're at. You're not being recognized. That's why you're being passed over, and it's leading to a conversation. And I'm talking about all these different answers. And at a bottom line is, if you can't navigate these questions and connect them to certain answers, you're not going to help this person. You're not going to influence them. And so that was sort of high level with some little illustrations. Let me pause there to see if you have a follow-up question on that.
No, that was good. And I think you in part answered my next question, Brian, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because I really want to emphasize this point. But, so your research, as you indicated already, your research indicated 6 answer types, right? Including theory, story, metaphor. But could you elaborate on how these answers can be used strategically in business scenarios exactly?
Yeah, so let me give you an example. I'll put it in a sales context. And let's say, everyone's selling their ideas or selling products, and there's a person sitting across from you. And in AQ terms, you want to listen for the questions they're asking. And if you're working with an operational person, they're probably going to be asked, questions that are practical. They want to know, how are we going to move forward? And in AQ terms, it gives you a simple lens to do that. You can tell them a procedure. Well, here's the 3 steps we're going to use. Step 1, 2, 3. And you give them a key action, something unique or best practice. You're going to satiate their need for those kind of answers. And I'll tell you what I'm saying may seem obvious, but it's not. An example sort of opposite of this, I was working with a sales organization, and they had junior sellers that were selling to executive buyers. In AQ terms, basically, the questions the buyers had were around, why do we want to do this? They were strategic. They were looking for stories. And you know what the sales reps are doing? They were answering with features and functions, sort of like procedures and actions. They're addressing the how question. So they were addressing the wrong question, and they weren't being intentional. And I'll give you one more example for leaders in a meeting. At a very high level, for leaders that are leading their next meeting, an effective meeting, I would say, is one that asks and answers all these questions we're talking about to varying degrees depending on emphasis. But I would assert that every one of us, including myself, have been in meetings where it becomes story time, right? Susan tells a story, John tells a story. We're 30 minutes into the meeting, and we feel like we've made some progress, but at the same time, it doesn't feel satisfying. In AQ terms, what happened was the meeting was not navigated intentionally. We allowed people and accepted any answer, basically stories, and we didn't really address the other questions like, well, what was the point of the story? Trying to get a concept. Well, how are we going to implement this procedure in action? And unless you're intentional, what happens is we drift through the world in these conversations and we don't control them. And if we don't control them, we can't influence the world.